The jungle was alive with a restless energy, its canopy trembling as if the earth itself feared what lurked within. Beauty, a young wanderer with eyes sharp as flint and a spirit that never yielded, stood at the edge of a ravine where the mist curled like smoke from the underworld. Tales of the king of the jungle, the colossal Kong, had spread through every tribe. He was said to be invincible, towering higher than the tallest trees, a beast who could crush bones with a single swipe. Yet, Beauty had come not just to see him, but to find a way to defeat him. For her people, survival depended on it. The previous nights had been filled with whispers around firelight, warnings that none who entered Kong's territory ever returned. She remembered the scars on her uncle's face, the trembling in his voice when he described glowing amber eyes that pierced the darkness and the thunder of steps that shook the ground. But unlike others, Beauty did not tremble. Fear, she knew, was the first weapon Kong used against his prey. To stand against him, one must master the heart before the body. She moved silently through the thick jungle, her bare feet learning the rhythm of the land. The air was heavy, rich with the scent of moss, damp earth, and something wilder, something primal that warned her she was close. Birds shrieked above, scattering from the treetops as though they knew what lurked nearby. Beauty carried no sword, no heavy weapon that could fail her. Instead, she trusted her cunning, her speed, and her understanding of the beasts that ruled this world long before humans walked among them. The first sign of Kong's presence came not with sight, but sound. A deep rumble, like a storm breaking underground, echoed through the forest. The earth quivered, and trees bent slightly as if bowing to a king. Beauty crouched low, her heart steady though her blood surged hot in her veins. She peered through the ferns and caught the first glimpse of him. Kong was a mountain of muscle and rage, his black fur glistening with sweat and dust, his eyes glowing like molten fire. He tore a giant tree from its roots as easily as a child would snap a twig, throwing it aside with a roar that made the birds take flight for miles. Beauty inhaled sharply but did not retreat. She studied him, his movements, his rage, the way his eyes darted to every sound. He was power, but power without thought could be turned against itself. Her mind spun with strategies. No beast, however mighty, was beyond weakness. She remembered the hunters, tales of animals falling not to strength but to traps, to patience, to the cleverness of those who knew where to strike. Kong's roar silenced the jungle, and for a moment, the world belonged only to him. But Beauty whispered to herself, every king can fall. She began marking the ground with signs, memorizing the terrain, mapping paths of escape and ambush. She saw the cliffs where loose rocks could tumble, rivers that could turn violent with sudden rains, and vines thick enough to entangle even the mightiest creature. She was not here to face him with brute force, but to learn the rhythm of his domain, to bend the jungle itself into a weapon sharper than any blade. As dusk painted the sky in hues of blood and fire, Kong settled near a clearing, beating his chest with a thunderous rhythm that shook Beauty's bones. But instead of fear, she felt a fierce determination rising within her. This beast, this so-called king, was flesh and blood. He could bleed, he could fall. Her people's survival depended on her courage to look upon him not as a god, but as a challenge. Silently, she withdrew into the shadows, her mind racing with plans. She had seen his strength, his fury, his dominance over the jungle. Now she needed to find his weakness. Perhaps in his pride, perhaps in the way he defended his territory without thought, perhaps in the blind rage that consumed him. She knew the first step to victory was not to strike, but to prepare. That night, under the gaze of 1,000 stars, Beauty sat alone by a small fire, sketching strategies in the dirt with a stick. The jungle sang around her, crickets, owls, distant growls, but she was lost in thought, envisioning the battle to come. She was no fool. To fight Kong was to flirt with death. But to do nothing was to condemn her tribe. Tomorrow, she would step into the heart of his kingdom not as prey, but as a challenger. The king of the jungle had ruled long enough, and Beauty intended to rewrite the story. Would you like me to extend part 2 in the same detailed style with 700 words, showing how Beauty finally challenges Kong? The dawn broke with a golden glow, but the jungle seemed restless, as though it knew a storm was coming. Beauty rose from her hidden camp, her body weary but her spirit sharpened like a hunter's blade. Today was the day she would face Kong, not as prey to be hunted, but as a rival who refused to kneel. The mist clung low to the forest floor, shrouding her movements as she made her way toward the river where Kong was known to appear each morning. Her traps were ready, her mind clear. She whispered to herself, "The jungle is my ally. He thinks it bends to him, but today it will rise with me. The sound of Kong's roar shattered the morning silence, a sound so immense that flocks of birds erupted from the trees. Beauty crouched low as she saw him emerge from the thick vegetation, his massive frame blotting out the sun. He was hungry, restless, and arrogant, moving with the confidence of a king who believed himself unchallenged. Kong tore down branches for food, scooping fruits and crushing them between his teeth. His fists pounded the earth in a show of dominance, as if reminding the world that he ruled. Yet, today, his audience was not trembling prey. It was Beauty. She stepped out from the shadows, her figure small but steady against the Titan's form. Taru, hiding in the distance, almost cried out in fear. But Beauty raised her chin, refusing to let her body betray weakness. Kong froze for a moment, his fiery eyes narrowing in confusion. This was no cowering human running for safety, this was a figure who dared stand openly before him. The jungle itself hushed, as though it waited to witness history. Kong let out a roar that shook the trees and pounded his chest, daring her to flee. But Beauty did not move. She thrust her spear into the ground before her, a signal that she came not to beg, but to challenge. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. This jungle is not yours alone, Kong. You may be strong, but you do not rule over life itself. Today, you will learn. Enraged, Kong charged, his colossal hands ready to crush her. At the last instant, Beauty darted aside, leading him toward the first trap. His massive foot crashed into a pit concealed by leaves, snapping vines that released a cascade of sharpened stakes. Kong roared in surprise as one scraped his leg, not deep enough to wound fatally, but enough to enrage him further. Beauty's heart hammered, but she smiled grimly. He could be hurt. He was not invincible. Kong thrashed, tearing apart trees in blind fury, but his rage blinded him to her cunning. Beauty darted through the undergrowth, luring him into snares that whipped around his limbs, slowing him, confusing him. The jungle itself seemed to tighten around him, each step weighed down by traps Beauty had woven from weeks of preparation. Kong bellowed, pulling free with sheer strength, but each escape cost him more energy. At last, Beauty led him toward the river's edge where boulders hung precariously above the cliffs. Taru, waiting with trembling hands, shoved the final lever. The rocks tumbled down, crashing into the water with explosive force. A wave surged upward, striking Kong square in the chest. For the first time, the mighty king stumbled, his footing unsteady. He beat his chest furiously, but his strength was faltering. Beauty seized the moment. She climbed a fallen tree that leaned toward him, her body agile as she leapt onto his broad arm. Kong roared, trying to swat her away, but she plunged her sharpened spear into his shoulder with a cry that echoed like thunder. The beast roared in agony, shaking the jungle. His eyes, once blazing with untouchable dominance, now flickered with something else, uncertainty. Beauty leapt back to the ground, her chest heaving, her eyes locked on him. She did not gloat, did not tremble. She simply stood, unbroken, while Kong staggered, bleeding. The message was clear. He was no god, no eternal king, but flesh and blood like all creatures. The jungle did not belong to him alone. Slowly, Kong backed away, his roars fading into heavy breaths. He cast one last burning glare at Beauty before retreating into the mist, his massive figure swallowed by the jungle's embrace. The earth grew still again, and the birds returned, singing cautiously. Taru emerged from hiding, his voice trembling with awe. You faced him, and lived. You showed him what no one dared. Beauty's gaze lingered on the forest where Kong had vanished. Not defeated, she whispered, but humbled. He knows now the jungle will not bow, and neither will we. From that day forward, the legend of Beauty spread across the tribes. She was not remembered as the one who killed the king, but as the one who broke his reign of fear. For strength may rule for a time, but courage and cunning carve legacies that last forever. Would you like me to now merge part 1 and part 2 into a single seamless 1400-word story without breaks?